became physical beings on a physical earth. That's when the body, physical body as we know it, the physical-chemical body appeared for the first time. And the earth became a solid body covered with water on which we could walk and walk on dry land. Didn't happen till here. All this time is entirely spiritual. And then we have the post-Atlantean. Okay, so dates. Got to give you some dates. As I said, each of these have 7 cultures. 7 epochs. These are epochs. Each has 7 cultures. So this is the post-Atlantean. And the post-Atlantean began with the Indian culture. And there's 7 cultures, right? Indian culture, then the Persian, then the Hebrew, Egyptian, Chaldean, Babylonian. Some just call it Egyptian Hebrew. Then the Greco-Roman. Then the Anglo-Germanic, which is the one we're in right now. Germanic. Anglo-Germanic. And then we have the Slavic after this. And then we have the, well, I'll call it American because I only have room for American. But I've seen it called the Scandinavian as well, Scandinavian culture. Each one of these are 2,160 years. Then, after that post-Atlantean epoch, we have a 6th and a 7th. These I have not seen any names for these. This has 7 cultures. This has 7 cultures. By the time we get to the end of this, everything will be spiritualized again. And we will take, the reason why we have a physical chemical body is because there are certain things we need to learn here which cannot be learnt anywhere else. Chief among which is, we can only develop our personal relationship with Christ. Because as I've already suggested, everybody has the same relation exactly to Christ. Everybody has, no matter what our color skin, what our sex is, where we live. We all have exactly the same as I described. However, whether we come to have a personal relationship with Christ is a personal affair, done out of freedom, if it's going to be done at all.
Cora, if I could interject something here. When you're talking about Christ, you're talking about Christ the figure, not the Christian church, the modern Christian.
About the Christian
I know. I mean, I know that, but I think that should be said.
Yeah, the thing is, okay, is I grew up Church of England. I went to Church of England every day, 10 years, morning and night at school. And I was disgusted. I mean, totally disgusted. I thought it was just a bunch of hypocrisy, hot air, arrogance. It never had anything to do with the Christ I read about. And I was totally, I hated it. I hated it. And I remember having a discussion with the mother of my first wife, who was a devout Roman Catholic. And we were having this heated discussion. I ended up saying to her, the fact of the matter is, lady, your Christ is a failure. And it's the truth. Because the Christ that the church worships is not Christ at all. No, I'm talking about Christ the being. Now, so that's what you get out of Steiner. See, I was so happy and gratified when I started reading Steiner because, you know, I had to say, I had my doubts about Steiner because of my experiences in the Church of England church, singing those bloody useless, pathetic hymns and listening to these pathetic songs. Oh, God. I remember church one day, I was at school. I looked up to the right, I said, there's a God, he must be just totally appalled by what he's listening to today. I said that. Anyway, so I started reading Steiner, and actually, you know how I got into Steiner? I was at my 7th year of my macrobiotic practice, and there was a thing going around in Boston when I was studying at the Cushing Institute, that when you become 7 years macrobiotic, you automatically become enlightened. They actually said that.
Automatically.
So I was 7th year macrobiotic, and I thought, you know, I don't have any enlightenment. But I did actually have an enlightenment. You know the form it took? Because I didn't have any spiritual life at all. None. I said, well, you better get your act together and get some spiritual practice going here. So I looked at myself and said, well, Corey, you are a white guy. You're a Caucasian. That means that your religion is Christianity. And I said, oh, God, it can't be. I'm sorry, I can't stand it. But that was the fact. You know, if I'm going to eat locally whole grains and seasons spiritually, as a white guy, that's my locally grown whole grains and vegetables spiritually. And I thought, oh gosh, this is awful. But that's it, I can't deny that. So I started reading the Gospels again for the first time since I was in school. And it was like, oh my God, it was just a total revelation to me. So then, by that time, I had started to learn about science because a friend of mine, very good friend of mine, had sent me a book called the Alcohol Science book, which the first time I read it, I couldn't take it. I got halfway through and I said, this is just too much. This is too much for me. I can't handle it. So I put it down. I sent it back to him. But a year later, I bought it. Anyway, the long and short of it is that I got very enthusiastic, of which I am still very enthusiastic about studying Steiner. And when he started talking about Christ, it was like a total revelation to me. Yeah, I said, that's the Christ I'm talking about. Not the one that they talk about in church. You know, the Holy Roman Catholic Church. And I got a new pope today, I see. And anyway, so now, so we're in the Anglo-Germanic culture. That comes to an end. I always have to work this out. All these numbers, you know, they get to be too much for me to handle. All right, it began 1413 AD. And so we add to that, okay, 1413. We add to that 1413 AD plus 2160. That finishes in 3573 AD. Okay, now we will incarnate approximately, you know, we go through the gate of death, like my mother-in-law did in January. We go into, and I'm going to talk about life, I'm going to give a whole lecture on life between death and rebirth later on this year. Because that's very pertinent, must-know information. Then we incarnate again. And that's approximately, I mean, it varies with everybody, but it varies about 1,000 years. So that means in Earth times, you know, in terms of Earth years. So that means, you know, if I die, say I die 25 years from now, when I'm 90, I hope. Or at least older than that, hopefully. So I'll be, let's say, what's the year now? It's 1960, 2013. So I die 2040. No, I'm 93. So that means I'll come back in 3040, which is 500 years before the end. Now the thing to talk about is the really important that we have the Lemurian culture came to an end by human beings destroying it. Okay, it seems to. Do you ever see that movie, The Dark Knight? You know, with the Joker in it. What a hell of a movie! It really is. Anyway, the Joker is he's a guy who likes to burn things, you know? He likes to set things on fire, blow things up. And he's got a particular grievance. But anyway, Batman is having a conversation with his butler. And then asking, you know, why is he doing this? Why is this man doing this? And the butler related to him that he'd been in the British Army, and they were in Burma, and there was a bandit there that was just robbing everybody blind and taking all the jewels and everything, and they couldn't catch him. He was in the forest. They couldn't get him. So that was the end of that conversation. Later on in the movie, Batman brings it up again and said, well, what happened to that guy? Well, we burned down the forest. And the butler said to him, the fact of the matter is, Batman, well, I can't remember what Batman's name is. What his real name is.
Bruce.
Bruce. The fact is, Bruce, there are people in the world who just like to see it burn.
The butler said that?
Yes. And of course we burnt the earth. You know, there were black magicians getting an ego trip going during the Lemurian, toward the end of the Lemurian, and they just set off the etheric world into a total and utter, you know, upheaval. The heat was so strong that we actually couldn't stand it today. The heat that was released during the Lemurian that destroyed it has actually been kind of like entrapped in the earth because we couldn't take it. Then the Atlantean came along because what had happened was wise guides who knew what was about to take place had gotten people to migrate toward Africa to where Atlantis was at that time, and populated Atlantis, a whole great migration of the people that were the least corrupted by what was going on in Lemuria. And they started the Atlantean culture. And of course people there got an ego trip going, and they started to mess around with nature, and they destroyed Atlantis by flood. And that happened approximately 12,000 BC, approximately. I mean, you'd have to calculate it. Just go back. Now, we are supposed to, when we get to the American culture, or the Scandinavian, what's going to happen is that the world is going to be destroyed by what is known as the war of all against all. In other words, only those people, and Steiner literally says only a handful of people are going to make it through the war of all against all, are the ones who purify themselves, have allowed themselves to be least influenced by the corrupting influences of Lucifer and Ahriman and the times in which we live. That's what the story is. So the purpose of macrobiotic way of life is to use our dietary intake to strengthen ourselves so we have physical, emotional, psychological, and spiritual health.